All right, it is 6 p.m. and we will get started with our budget hearing.
Okay, I was thinking today, this is number 33 or number 34 for me here at the Brandon Valley School District, and the good thing about that is I can't remember having a very negative budget scenario or presentation, so that's always good news for the Brandon Valley School District. I just started off, I'd written down a couple notes here about the total budget. Obviously, we've been through the preliminary budget and just a few changes from that in this final one, but some of the things that made this possible this year, we always have to remember that the state aid increases that we get, we received this year another state aid increase, a tremendous increase of 7.1%. And that's followed up from last year of a 6% increase. So we got to remember to be thankful for those, because state statute says, you know, we're quick to blame when we don't get all the money, but state statute says 3% or inflation, whichever is less. So this would have been a 3% year by statute. The governor went above and beyond. And as we know, the state of South Dakota had some financial windfalls this year, and the governor shared those successes with the school district across the state of South Dakota, so we're very thankful for that. That allowed us to continue to do the things that we've done with salary policy, giving an 8% raise to all of our staff. And then this year, as we talked about in the preliminary budget, we had some pretty substantial inflationary increases this year that amounted to just about $400,000 of just stuff, you know, just the supplies and things that we purchased, so we were able to cover that. The second thing I had noticed in this year's budget, that once again, we talked about this in the preliminary budget, but we were able to avoid the fiscal cliff of the ESSER funds from the last 3 years. The last 3 years, we've received $7.2 million in federal funding, just that COVID money. And trying to spend those monies in a prudent and responsible manner is sometimes not easy. You gotta look into the future, which ones we're gonna keep, which ones we weren't. And I think we managed through that boom of money there. This year's budget includes the continuation of 4 classroom teachers from those monies, 3 guidance counselors, a school nurse, and a Tier 2 behavioral educational assistant at Brandon Valley Middle School. So 4, 7, 8, 9 staff that we planned on keeping, so that was key to making those federal monies work. Next thing is we're getting close anyhow. A little premature when I say the successful completion of the $10 million addition at the high school. We're close to completion of that. 25 classrooms, and that was paid for through monies that we had put aside in the capital outlay fund for several years, planning on that addition. And then the last thing that we'll talk about in the body of the budget is the management of the district fund balances is key to our financial success. I really believe that that we do better at that than most, so that's been a key to our budget successes here. With that, I'll take you into the slides that I presented, or I guess the first one is the appropriations, page 2. Total general fund appropriations of $40,074,000. Total capital outlay expenditures of just under $10 million. The biggest change between our preliminary budget and our final budget, guys, is in the capital outlay fund. We're able to put that land acquisition into our current funds, pay for that with our current funds. We had a big surplus in there in our preliminary budget. Decided to expend surplus on that land acquisition rather than borrow money and go through that rigmarole. And so, and then also there's $1.1 million of the high school project that was not included in the preliminary budget that we're not done with yet, so it'll carry over into fiscal year '24. And that'll just come out of the fund balance because we planned that to come out of there, so we're just carrying over 1.1 million. And that's why you'll see a deficit of 1.1 million on the next page. Special ed fund is $9,568,000. Bond redemption fund is $3.2 million. And the food service fund is just under $3.9 million of expenditures. The revenues for those funds, the general fund, we have projected $39.6 million, $39,581,000. So it shows a planned deficit of $493,000. The capital outlay fund, which we just talked about, we had shown a excess of $3 million surplus prior to this, but we're changing that now to show the $1.1 million deficit, which is the carryover of the high school project that's in our fund balance. Special ed fund has revenues projected of $9,660,000, which provides for a $92,000 surplus. And bond redemption fund, as always, is about a break even or a little bit of a loss. And the food service fund is showing a deficit of $185,000. The fund balances are on the bottom of that page. We'll get into those more at the end of the presentation here and talk about those fund balances, but it's a major key to our financial successes. The charts that we have, the revenue, total revenue for all funds in the Brandon Valley School District is $65,066,000, $39.5 million in the general fund, $8.9 million in the capital outlay fund, $9.66 million in the special education fund, $3.2 million in the bond redemption fund, and $3.7 million in the food service fund. So total revenue that we take in is just over $65 million. The next slide is the expenditures for all funds once again. The total expenditures for all funds is $66,752,000. As we talked about the various funds there, general fund accounts for 60% of the total budget of the Brandon Valley School District. Capital outlay fund is 15%, special education is 14%, and then bond redemption and food service about 5% each. Next slide is a salary slide that I always like to show. These are total salaries in the Brandon Valley School District. Over 75% goes directly into the classroom. Teacher salaries, educational assistants. You can see the breakdown of the other ones there. 6% in custodial maintenance, 3.8% central office administration, 3.8% food service, 6.2% building principals and directors, and 4.4% transportation. Next, we'll go a little depth with the general fund, $39,581,000. Where does it come from? Local taxes of $12.5 million. Other local sources of just under $800,000. We receive $140,000 from county apportionment fine money. $24.7 million in state aid. The federal sources are down back to numbers that Brandon Valley is accustomed to, which are not very high, very low numbers in our federal revenues. And then we transfer monies from the capital outlay fund into the general fund each year to supplement that of $1.1 million. You can see on the percentages in the pie graph there that the state provides 62.4% of our total general fund revenue, and local taxes provide 31.6%. Federal sources are below 1%. Now that ESSER money is gone, we don't have the huge numbers. Now in the general fund expenditures, Instruction of $40 million. Instruction is 25 million of that. Support services at 13.8 million. Early retirement is 165,000, and co-curricular is just above $1 million. Instruction is 62.5% of the total expenditures in the general fund. By object level, the accounting term that the state uses to track funds, salary and benefits are 34.6%. That's 86.4% of our total general fund budget is in salary and benefits. You can see each one of those other categories. Utilities are 4%, other purchase services are 4%, supplies and materials 4%. Plow the majority of our money into the salary and benefit side. Next, the capital outlay fund. Revenues of 8.9 million and expenses of just under 10 million. You'll see up at on the expense side, the right-hand column, high school, and I've told you about this high school addition. We're carrying over $1.1 million of expenses. And then the new one from the preliminary budget is the $3.6 million for land acquisition. And as I said, it just makes a heck of a lot more sense to pay for that out of our current funds rather than borrowing money. Special Education Fund, revenues of $9,660,000, expenditures of $9,568,000. Expenditures on the right-hand side, you can see instructional is 75.5%, and co-op, our relationship with Teachwell, is 13.4% of our special ed budget. Quite a percentage of our special ed budget is in conjunction with our co-op, which is typical in the special education fund. The next slide kind of shows the fund balance issue that I talked about prior. In the general fund this past year, we had a budgeted deficit of $525,000. We ended up with an actual deficit of $629,000. If I can back up, the revenues came in at 99.5%, and the expenditures 99.8%. And if you remember monthly during the budget presentations, that I always regurgitate numbers of 99.5 to 99.8%. So very pleased with that. And on the expenditure side, I try very hard. I don't play the game of fluffing those expenditures. Those are as close as I can possibly get them. As you can see, 99.8% of a $37 million budget. So our fund balance went from 8.1 million down to about 7.5 million, which just is a shade over 20% in the general fund. That's the management of those fund balances. Actual deficit went up, but you have to remember that our enrollment projection, we missed that by 60 kids last year, so that was another 450,000. So if you added that to the 525,000, it would have been a $1 million deficit. We had some revenues, extra revenues come in, and expenditures about $100,000 under. So that made it so we only went down 629,000. Capital outlay fund, you can see the $6.5 million deficit projected, the building of the high school project. Actual is 5.1 million. So the fund balance at the beginning of the year is 7.9 million, at the end 2.8 million. And then that'll drop down to 1.7 million at the end of next year. And then we'll continue to start the process of rebuilding that after that then. Special Education Fund, once again, the expenditure is 99.8% of budget, 100% of the revenue, right at 100%. So our deficit is at 342,000 actual. Took the fund balance from 1.6 million down to 1.2 million. fund balance in the special education fund is right at about 14%, a little under our target of 15%. And then the last page is just kind of an overview of the whole budget. It gives a comparison of each of the funds from last year to this year. General fund budgeted expenditures increased just a little over 7%. Capital outlay is way down, 31% down due to the high school project. Special education fund is up 8.8%. Bond redemption fund up 3.2%. Those bonds, when we issue bonds, we project growth in the district. So each year our payments go up to account for that growth that we project in the district. So that's why that amount goes up each year, about 3%, 3-4%. And the food service fund down 2%, and that was just coming off the COVID stuff. I didn't know where we were at with federal reimbursements and stuff coming off the COVID. They were paying for so much stuff there. So, and then the revenues up 7.6% in the general fund, 10% in the capital outlay fund, 12% in the special education fund, 6.8% in the bond redemption fund. The general fund, as we talked about, fund balance decreased $600,000 to $7.5 million. Next year, we were realizing a 7.6% increase in revenue, $2.8 million. That revenue of 2.8 is comprised of $2.4 million increase in state funding, 165 kid increase of 1.2 million, increase in our capital outlay flexibility of 300,000, and we had a federal revenue decrease of 759,000, and then we also have to account for our deficit of our enrollment projection from the previous year of 450,000. So the net of all those numbers is 2.8 million. And as we always know, the trigger in the general fund is the enrollment. We're projecting 165 positive enrollment growth this year. And looking at the numbers, our kindergarten class just is not quite at our higher projections. I think, after 2 years, that's more of a trend than an abnormality. So I think we have to start adjusting that kindergarten class projection for future years. That's right now it's about 50 kids under what I projected. I'm hopeful that the other grades will make up for this difference. We've seen a lot of activity in our office here in the last week or so with enrollments, and they should start popping in more and more. So I'm hopeful that we can make that 165 kid increase. The expenditures from the previous year up 2.8 million. Salary and benefits comprised 2.2 million of that, and additional staff another 1.2 million. We went down in federal expenditures, and we didn't have any new early retirees this year, so we're able to claim an additional $175,000 in savings in the expenditure side, and then the $400,000 of supplies and materials is mainly just inflationary increases of roughly 10%. The capital outlay fund, we're projected to basically $3.25 billion valuation next year, which is up another 8% from the previous year. Those numbers continue to go up. We talked about the land acquisition, 3.6 million is in this year's current operating funds, so we don't have to borrow anything. The special education fund, once again, our fund balance dropped to $1,250,000, 8.8% increase in expenditures from the previous year, 770,000, and a 12% increase in revenue of $1,062,000. Our federal funds in the special education fund went up a little more than the 8%. That's where we realize those monies. And the bond redemption fund is just a break-even fund. entertain any questions. Try not to go too long. Since we've been through it in the preliminary budget.
The 165 for next year, students, how much traditionally comes from kindergarten growth versus other grade growth?
Well, it's on a district-wide level, and I projected about 500 kids in kindergarten, total JK and kindergarten. Right now, it's at about 450, so this current year, we're right at 500, I think. So 50 kids of that.
I remember about 8 years ago, one of the first days on the job, I had asked a similar question to Mr. Lundberg, and his comment, and you've heard it over the last few years, is there was almost a guaranteed 100 student growth. It's like 100 kids you automatically got with incoming kindergarten versus graduates going out, and then you would incur some additional growth, grades 1 through 11 or whatnot, but historically, I think it's been about that. Would
Yeah,
that
and
be
part of
fair?
that is our high school classes are catching up, that we
Right.
don't have that huge differentiation between the high school going out and the kindergarten coming in.
Okay.
But I think we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna have to adjust a little bit that kindergarten class in future years, just, it's more of a trend, and the only thing I can figure is that the total birth rates in Minnehaha County, I always figured a percentage go to Brandon Valley, and you don't know what, it's impossible to determine that, but it must be not quite as high a percentage going to Brandon Valley is what I'm calculating in there.
The other question that I have is inflation. So last year, I think we were a little nervous about inflation with material costs in this budget, and also with special education going up. What I assume is from an increase in cost of services as opposed to a volume-driven. You feel like we're covered for next year with our inflation for both services and special education and overall operations?
Yeah, cost of services go up a lot, and that's our relationship with the co-op, those kids that are just more expensive, they're more needy and require more staffing, so that's part of it. And back on the inflationary part of that, I just really didn't have an inflationary number that I had to plug in previous years, and this year it's right at 10%. Other question? Like I said, overall, it's a pretty positive budget year. Again, very pleased with where we're at, and continue to plow the majority of our money into salary and benefits to our staff, and that's very positive. I had one little quick story. There was a superintendent's class with USF that I always get the opportunity to go in and talk about the business stuff, and it's just kind of a Q&A back and forth, and the 20 people in that class, as Ellie reports back from her colleagues at the Associated School Boards, how do you guys do that? Your salaries are tremendous. Everybody knows about our salary enhancement program, and so the word's out there of what a good situation it is here at Brandon Valley.
Madam Chair, it would be a opportune time for me to just comment, when we look at the annual budget and the annual budget adoption in July, I want everyone to think way back to October and November, and that's when we start having the conversation about 5-year plans at the building level and the department level, and then that work gets done and then compiled, and then in February you receive a 5-year planning process or a 5-year plan update that outlines all of the wants in addition to the needs, et cetera. And then after that, you have your preliminary capital outlay budget that is developed by the central office and then produced so that we can hit those big ticket budget items that have to be procured according to statute. And then you get a preliminary budget presentation, and then ultimately this presentation. I guess what I'm getting at is, our annual budget is a project that takes many, many months to assemble and complete, and hats off to Mr. Lundberg, Mr. Schobert, Mary Miller, Stacy Bruce, all working on and in and out of the business office in terms of the compilation and the creation of our respective annual budgets. So certainly want to express our gratitude and appreciation for all of the work that they do, and certainly think that it is a high-quality, viable budget. It's a little over 65 million bucks, but utilized in great ways, and certainly appreciate all the work that has been done, not just by Mr. Lundberg, but by his respective colleagues in the business office, as well as our administration that works through all of their respective administrative processes when developing those 5-year plans and those recommendations. So all of those things, oh, I forgot teacher negotiations is also a small piece of how the number ends up. But anyway, my point is, lots of months of work go into ultimately the creation of your annual budget, and we have one of the best doing that work, and is certainly something that we appreciate greatly, all the time, energy, and commitment that goes into it. So certainly would recommend approval here later this meeting.
As I tell Jared a lot, now my work is done. Now it's these guys and his work, get those kids enrolled here.
Just to piggyback off of that, I think it's more, you know, Dr. Larson, like you said, it's months of planning. I think it's more than that. I mean, if we're going through these budgets, like the other school boards coming to us and saying, how do you do it? Well, you don't do it in a year. You don't do it in months. It's a 5-year, 40-year. I mean, Paul's been doing this for longer than I've been alive, probably. And so it shows, you know, and it's a lot easier for us to do this. It's a lot easier for Paul to come back to all of his numbers that he's been working on for years and years, not just months. So absolutely, that's where when school districts come to us and say, how do you do it? Well, we've been doing it for 10+ years, 20+ years. So that's even more hats off to Paul and all of his staff that does it. So thank you.
Thank you.
You're gonna be able to start your meeting
Right now?
very close
Very close.
by the time I'm ready.
Thank you. Oh,